In our study of Sri Aurobindo's synthesis of yoga, we are at the chapter titled The Soul and Its Liberation, where Sri Aurobindo has taken a pause from the larger discussion of the book in order to consider the implications of this relation between Purusha and Prakriti that we have seen so far. We saw that the sense of an individual consciousness, the Purusha, is as if in opposition to the sense of an environing nature. We feel ourselves as if oppressed by a nature which seems to form us, upon which we depend, which seems somehow to compel us to do whatever she decides. On the other hand, we find in ourselves the sense of an I, an awareness, which is not of nature, which feels as if it is free. We feel that we have a freedom to exercise ourselves, and with the freedom comes a responsibility to do what is right. Not only this is true of larger nature around us, which extends all the way into the universe, life, as we will say, generally, but it is true equally of our own nature, our body, our emotions, our mind. We find as if the thoughts are always trying to define us. Our emotions seem to want to have their own life. Our body itself seems to compel the mind to follow what it wills. And yet we feel there is this awareness that is I, more truly I, which can separate from body, which can refuse the body's demands and instincts, which can separate from emotions and refuse to follow a whirl of emotions, or stand back from thoughts and even reshape, redirect, or silence the thoughts or emotions or activity. And so we have this persistent sense of soul, that is consciousness, and nature, that is this movement of activity of various grades of energy. We saw in the previous chapter that the relationship between these two can be different. The soul can say, I am separate and remain separate, or it can say, I make possible the movement of this nature. And then even I choose which direction my thoughts will go, my emotions will go, or my life's circumstances will lead. And eventually, through 6 different facets of these relationships, it can rise to a poise of mastery, where not only it feels nature as an extension of its own energy, it can will whatever it chooses and nature follows, but also it enjoys this relationship with nature as its own power of expression. The joining of these two takes place in the highest poise of consciousness, where we discovered that the pure existence of Satchidananda is the cause of this sense of I that is always unchanging, supporting everything. And the consciousness and power of consciousness of Satchidananda is the origin of this whole movement of nature. And the play between these two is the expression of the bliss of the Satchidananda. Recognizing this true relationship, we are now exploring in this chapter the implications that it has for this yoga, which seeks not to withdraw from nature or life. It not only accepts nature and life, but it recognizes nature and life for what they truly are, and even seeks to realize the divine consciousness in nature, transform nature itself to divinize nature. And so this chapter is exploring this whole perspective from deeper and deeper dimensions with all the subtle nuances. In the portion we last read, we discovered something extraordinary. Sri Aurobindo, having described that this true person is not the surface ego center, but the center of the divine consciousness that we are truly, and the fact of our recovery of the true person is also accompanied by a change in our relationship with nature. Nature also now seems to become more conscious, more divine. Sri Aurobindo has now brought us to an extraordinary discovery of the importance of the individual. This individual being of ours, he says, is that by which ignorance is possible to self-conscious mind. But it is also that by which liberation into the spiritual being is possible, and the enjoyment of divine immortality. So here is the interesting insight. Because there is such a thing as an individual that I am, I can experience ignorance. But also I can experience the awakening from ignorance and grow from there into liberation of a spiritual consciousness. If there was not this individual, what would happen? You would have a mass of a universal energy flowing, moving mechanically. Pretty much the picture that physics gives to us. That's all this is happening somehow by chance, by mechanically driven energy, and all your experience of consciousness is a phenomenon and only an appearance. It has no value of its own. And you look at the universe and you say, well, it is pointless. But also that it is predetermined. Everything that happens would be the consequence of other things. There would be no free will. Even if there is appearance of free will, it would be purely the result of mechanical movements that can be calculated and predicted. The fact that there is an individual makes possible the play of free will. Makes possible that somebody can choose to not follow this line but choose a different line. Not only you can choose a different line, you can change the pattern of nature's movements into a different line. You can carry nature with you. Not only that, you can discover that you are not just this mind in an ignorance, you are actually a deeper and truer consciousness which formed all this. And increasingly as you awaken to that consciousness, you find your influence upon nature also widens and grows in power, in skill, in perfection, even in manifesting the divinity that you find you are in your origin. And all this is possible because of this individuality that has emerged in nature, allowing for a free experience in one center, while everything else may remain the same original mechanical movement of nature. Now, to have only one center would be pointless again, and that's why there are many centers. How many? Uncountable, because the universe is unlimited, infinite. Only recently they discovered in one little patch of sky, which was found to be a little obscure, 300,000 galaxies hiding there. And just a few days ago, in a tiny patch of sky. And each galaxy, remember, has a few billion stars, each of which has at least a dozen planets, each of which has a few billion living beings, individuals. And all this, each of these individualities is a center which can experience its freedom and assert its freedom and grow in its own unique way. And, most beautifully, each can relate to each other in the play. Now, the importance of the individual becomes so critical here. Without the individual, there would not be this experience of freedom, nor the possibility of experiencing many things in the universe. And so he says, it, the individual being, is not the eternal in his transcendence or in his cosmic being which arrives at this immortality. It is the individual who rises into self-knowledge. In him it is possessed, and by him it is made effective. Each one in our own space is now actualizing whatever potential that he glimpses and works out. And then, even then, in our realization of all as our larger self, and in our oneness with God and other beings, this play can and must persist, unless we desire to cease from all self-expression and all but a tranced and self-absorbed self-experience. Now we can choose to withdraw, but when we do that, it is the individual who chooses to withdraw and cease to be participating in the play, allowing all other individuals to continue the play. And here, by pointing this out, he is revealing something extraordinary. He shows us that every possibility of the divine, that the divine can experience in himself, can be played out simultaneously because of the numerous individuals. Each individual is really the divine pursuing one line of experience and exploring that possibility of experiencing and expressing himself. And what you discover is something so wonderful. In the divine is infinite possibility, And in order for him to explore all these infinite possibilities, he bursts out into so many individualities, each of which is entirely the divine, pursuing one line of experience of self-discovery and self-expression. Each of these is the same entire divine, following one line of possibility and journey. For a moment, we step back and gaze at this beautiful vision. And for a moment, we will also allow our minds to look at two levels of reality. The divine consciousness beyond space, beyond time, utterly absorbed in his blissful self-discovery of infinite possibilities that he can be, every state of consciousness, every experience, every shade of joy and delight, every form that he can express himself as, all of these are within him, beyond space, beyond time. And then, as he explores all these possibilities and puts them all in relation to each other and plays with them, we have the experience of unfolding space and unfolding time. As he puts these relations of all his infinite possibilities in relation to each other, it is as if he expands out to become space. As he sequences them to unfold experiences, it is as if he is unrolling his journey into time. But remember, he is at the same time beyond space and time, in which all is simultaneous. So as he pours himself into space and time, all those things which are simultaneous here appear in sequence and spread out in space and unrolling across time. And you discover something so beautiful. The whole universe, the entire creation, is himself flowing out as energy, but it is also he himself entering each point to support each point of space and each point of time, and form and awaken as individuals within all this flow of the river. And each individual is himself awakening to his own possibilities differently and uniquely. Therefore, nothing in the universe ever repeats itself. Nothing is ever the same as another. Each wave is unique. Each bubble of foam on the wave's crest is unique. Each is an experience of individuality, of the divine, playing in his delight. And then there are those special focal points which are not so transitory as the waves, where an individuality is being built up and developed across changing forms. And we see an evolution. Again, the very nature of evolution is that at each step something new emerges, something new grows, which was not seen before, which even seemed impossible before. So an unfolding of the divine possibilities, hidden as if in a seed, but flowing out, always something new, always something new. And these special centers of consciousness on which the divine concentrates, not momentary bursts of experience of individualities, but sustained individualities, are they those centers where he builds his higher possibilities of experience. So there's a play of individuality which is all over in nature. You see, every stone is individual in a sense, but not really distinct. The mother gives this example, if you take a collection of 10 stones, you can't really separate one from the other. And yet they are individual in some sense. Everything is unique, every wave is unique, but after a while you can't quite distinguish between them. But these individual centers which are growing and evolving, they become so distinct that you can say, you are so and so. I am seeing you after 20 years, but I can recognize you. Your hair may have changed color, your body form may have shrunk or expanded, but your eyes are the same. You're the same person sitting inside this changed body. How do you recognize that? There's something persisting while everything else is growing, changing. These are the centers in which the divine is exploring his greater possibilities. So, even when the choice is made by an individual to withdraw into trance and stop participating in the play, it is an experience of the divine, choosing to explore what is it like to withdraw from the game, even as another aspect of him explores what is it like to get lost in the game, and all possibilities in between. Always the divine holds that unity from all these different standpoints. From his consciousness, every plane, every center, powers of self or selves of itself, individualities, in our limited intellectual language, of one conscious being. It is always the same divine in each of these, in so many individualities. Each one of us is one of these individualities. That is an aspect of the divine working out a line of self-exploration and self-expression. And so he says, to stand away from God in limited ego, limited mind, is to stand away from ourselves, because we are actually that. To be unpossessed of our true individuality, to be the apparent and not the real individual. Now we may again step back and look at an analogy. If you have seen a puppet show, you will find the puppet master is behind the curtain, puts up one hand with a puppet and then another hand with another puppet, and it is he who's making the whole game. And after a while, he replaces one character and another character comes up, and the game continues, replacing characters. Well, he has only two hands because he is human, but if he is divine, he has 1,000,000 hands. But each of these is a puppet of his own expression, uniquely playing out its line, its character. But if you say the puppet is the person, that would be an error. It would be identifying with the false and apparent individual. To say that each puppet is the divine, is the puppet master truly, taking this form or that form, that would be recognizing the true individuality. So in our own subjective experience, we can say, I am so and so with this name, with this body, with this particular personality, and that would be the superficial appearance of the puppet. Or you can say, I am that, choosing to play out this experience. But one has to become aware, to be taken up into the divine being and be aware of our spiritual, infinite and universal consciousness as that in which we now live, is to possess our supreme and integral self, our true individuality. It is our power of self-knowledge, he says. Now think about it this way. How do you know yourself? If I say, do you know who you are? You've seen movies where a person wakes up and he has no memory of who he is or how he ended up there. And the whole journey is an attempt to find out what? What was my name? Where was I born? How did I end up here? Where was I going? But if you stop for a moment and consider the person becoming aware and saying, who am I? Those details are transient, they're not so important. How did I appear as this individual awareness? That would be a question worth pursuing, which is of course leading you to the spiritual realization of yourself. The self-knowledge and the power of self-knowledge to recognize who you truly are is that. Otherwise, any kind of partial self-knowledge is useful, takes you closer, but doesn't quite get you there. So now in our discussion, we had so far the divine, and then we had nature, which is power of the divine to manifest. And Sri Aurobindo has introduced the importance of this third point, the individual. So there is the divine, God, there is nature, and then there is the individual. Of course, many individuals, but still the principle of individuality and its importance, which allows for the possibility of this multiple experience of divinity simultaneously. And most important, allows for each of these experiences to meet each other and play out their possibilities. So, these three together are the important point he is leading us to. By knowing the eternal unity of these three powers of the eternal manifestation, God, nature, and the individual self, and their intimate necessity to each other, we come to understand existence itself, and all that in the appearances of the world now puzzles our ignorance. So many things we see in the world and we say, why is the world so messy, so confused, full of so much suffering, so much perversion, so much darkness? Why can't things be whatever we expect it to be? But we can understand this only when we understand the true relation between these three. And what is it that we have to understand? The eternal unity of these three powers of the eternal manifestation, as well as their intimate necessity to each other. They need each other for the fulfillment of the manifestation. But at the same time, they are one. And so this we will explore a little bit, because after that he dwells upon this, not going too much in detail. The detail he has touched upon in other discussions, which we will explore now. Most importantly among them, I will read from one of the articles which Sri Aurobindo writes, and we'll look at a few of these things before we go into the one article where he brings all three together. In one of the articles he writes, God is the reverse side of nature, nature the obverse side of God. Interesting. So if you look at nature, you don't see God. I see trees, I see plants, I see human beings, I see thoughts, whatever level of nature you're looking at. But if you could look behind the reverse side of it, then you would see God. If you can look as if through nature to the light which is beyond, of which nature is an expression, that would be God. And nature is the obverse side, the side which is in front, as if concealing God. Now, so far we can play with this relationship. God is always behind all activities of nature. Every activity, movement or form of nature is as if concealing God which is behind, or expressing God from behind, but conceals at the same time as it expresses. So you look at a flower and you can say, oh, it's beautiful, or it's so different from that flower which is also beautiful. Or you can say, it is God smiling in this form in this way, and God smiling in that form in that way. When you see the beautiful flower exhibition which is there, and you must all see it, it is exceptionally beautiful. You enter the space and you can feel the sacred. Because it is as if through the flowers the divine presence radiates. And then you look at the names that the mother gives to each flower, and you recognize which particular aspect of the divine consciousness it reveals while concealing. But the beauty of this formulation of reverse and obverse is that one cannot exist without the other. You see, if you take a sheet, there is a reverse side and there's an obverse side. But the implication is the sheet cannot exist unless it has two sides, or one side cannot exist unless the other side is simultaneously as importantly present. You remove nature, there is no God that you can perceive. You remove God, there is no nature that can be expressed. It's amazing insight. It means nature does not have a separate existence of its own, or God does not have a separate existence from nature. The moment there is the divine presence, nature must be there. That nature may be half asleep. It can become the emptiness of space, as if nature is lost in darkness, but she is still there. The nature of emptiness, we will say. But on the other side, when nature begins to become active, what she reveals is the divine presence which is hidden behind. And when nature awakens to herself and becomes fully freed from her own limitations and denseness and obscurity, she reveals the true nature which is divine. And so implied in this articulation are so many profound insights. If you dwell upon this, meditate on it, you will find many interesting things. So this is the first passage I want to read. I'll read from the larger part. This one must always nature the obverse side of God, our conscious existence. And this is how he says we should see life, as this double term. We'll look at another passage of Sri Aurobindo. There's in fact a whole chapter in the Life Divine where Sri Aurobindo has described, the title of the chapter itself is Nature and God. I will just take a look at that. Let me see. So there's a whole chapter in the Life Divine which is called The Progress to Knowledge, God and Nature. And Sri Aurobindo himself has made summaries of specific chapters to help the reader to follow the overall thought process across. So here I will read from this portion. To rise out of sevenfold ignorance into the integral knowledge is the progress of man's being. He starts with three categories: himself, that's man, nature or cosmos, and God. And though he tries to deny any two of these in order to affirm the third only, he cannot really succeed, for he is neither separate nor sufficient to himself. So you'll see in the tendency, the first tendency of our awakening is, there is no God, there is no nature, I am most important, the whole universe exists for me. And if at all there's a universe, it's for my satisfaction. So I try to affirm myself, if there's a God, then he should be fulfilling what I expect for my growth. He should be serving me all the time. So you de-emphasize the other two and affirm yourself. But he cannot succeed. For he is neither separate nor sufficient to himself. You cannot separate these things because after all we saw the three are really one. But if you separate yourself, you find something is missing, and you have to eventually find your completeness in these two. Cosmos also is not sufficient to itself, but points always to an infinite, one and absolute behind it. So if you just had a universe, as we saw, the picture of the universe given by science is rather dull and pointless. If there was not in the whole universe a sense of purpose, of rising towards some higher possibility, discovering a oneness to be expressed, and a whole sense of direction and meaning in its unfolding, something is missing again. So that it always points to an infinite one and absolute behind it. And to affirm the absolute to the exclusion of these two others leaves man unsatisfied and cosmos unexplained. If you say there is only the absolute divine, something is missing. And you can't explain why cosmos is like this. So, in affirming himself, man has first to put himself in front and act and feel as if God and the world existed for him and were less important to him than himself. This is his egoistic phase, necessary to disengage his individuality out of nature and as if against her, and to bring it out into force and capacity. Now you see the importance of ego. The ego itself is the mechanism by which nature is forming individuality. You see this in our individual life as we come into our own as an individual in teenage often, the movement of rebellion. No, you will not tell me what I want. I decide. It's my life. But this movement is a very short phase which actually is a representation of many million years of evolution. in which sustained throughout and even for the rest of our life is implied the center of the ego that says everything is for me, for my satisfaction, for my growth. In the very first impulse of an atom forming out of a inchoate waves of energy, in the first emergence of the atom, there is a rigidity and resistance of the atom against the universe. If you try to hit the atom, it will not break. It takes a huge piling up of equipment to break a single atom. It resists, and what a stupendous force of resistance. When you manage to break the atom, it releases this violent explosion, which was the energy which it held to resist against the whole universe. Amazing amount of energy has gone to form that atom. And then the bonds in which the atoms join again hold enormous energy. To break those bonds releases a huge amount of energy, depending on the kinds of bonds. Some are so rigid. If you take, for example, iron, the atomic bonds are so close and so tight, you can't break them. But if you take a looser bond at a molecular level, in wood, for example, you can heat it, it catches fire and it burns. What is happening? You're breaking the molecular bonds, and what is released is this heat and light. That was the energy concealed to bind together. Now at each level of evolution, you find the formation of individualities and the ego center built with so much energy to be able to survive against the universe, to not collapse. And the same process you see in the plant evolution and later in the animal evolution. The ego center is built up with a certain insistence and force precisely so that it won't break down easily under pressure against the pressure of the universe. And yet, as you evolve, the ego grows more complex, also more fragile. Now your body ego, for example, does not have the rigidity of the atomic ego. It is more organized, more complex in what it can express, but less rigid, less strong, more dependent. And yet, because the individuality is sufficiently formed, it can now engage with its environment to survive. So unlike the atom, which can only resist by kind of an inertia, the body can say, all right, if there's a fire, I can run away. If there is food, I can go and eat. I can organize my food so that I'm more secure. And all the possibilities for ego to organize its environment are there. The hard rigidity of the atom gives way to a complex interdependence in which my ego now widens to include parts of nature. And then as it comes more and more into his mind, the ego becomes so much more complex. The engagement with the universe is also so much more complex. And even with the awareness of some deeper or higher heart's love or mind's insight, even the ego gives up partially its center in order to serve and help others, in order to help in a larger evolutionary movement. I will make my garden more beautiful. I will organize my knowledge so that others can share in it, and so on. So having made a strong nucleus, which now cannot be easily broken, the ego can outgrow its limitations and begin to serve a larger purpose. Which purpose? It can open out to the universe and say, I will help the universe's evolution. You see the form that it takes in science, to try to bring existing powers of nature into some structure of organization by which you can do so much more. And in its most recent and perhaps most dangerous phase, it says, now that I understand nature's machinery of the genetics, I can improve the genes. And perhaps within a single generation achieve what nature might take 1,000,000 years to do in her slow way. I will assist. At least that's the form in which it justifies this movement. At the same time, as it can assist nature, it can also say, if it goes deep enough, to realize, oh, but I am here to fulfill the divine purpose, and I can assist in this also. And it can take two forms, more egoistic form that says, if I discover my true divine potential, then I can be so much more and I can do so much more. Or it can take the other form where it says, I am here as an expression of that, and recognizing the truth of this, I give myself to the divine, that the divine may work through me. Both ways eventually will get you to the same realization. Even if you start by saying, I'm going to do, eventually in the very act of serving the divine, your narrow ego thins, the egoism fades, and you find yourself more and more fulfilled by opening and giving yourself to your own true person, true individuality in the divine. And so you realize the movement of the ego's growth follows a path which first builds the individuality. Once sufficiently built, it can do so many things. So this is what Sri Aurobindo is highlighting. He has to affirm himself in the ignorance before he can perfect himself in the knowledge. So the initial affirming is to develop force and capacity, organize all this, and then perfect himself in the knowledge. Afterwards, he has to seek for himself in nature and God and others. You see, once he has grown in knowledge, he says, oh, but all these beings are myself. This nature is my own deeper expanse. I am not limited by the body. All that exists is an extension of myself. I am not limited by this narrow mind. All awareness is my mind. And equally, he realizes that I am that, or that is me. But it still seeks himself. But it is still himself that he seeks to know and possess, and his own perfection or salvation, which is his motive. In doing all this, there is still the sense of the driving power is, I need to know myself. I need to recover my true freedom. I need to make myself or become perfect. And then he explains how through this process now he gets rid of the sevenfold ignorance. I don't read that, it's a longer passage. He explains the nuances of 7 kinds of ignorance which shut us up in this littleness. And as those 7 veils are gradually dissolved, the result is that at the same time he realizes the unity of himself and nature in the first 3 steps of knowledge of himself and God in others, of himself with all beings relatively in nature and absolutely in God, and of God and nature. So these are the different levels of his discovery of unity. Again, I skip that. The knowledge of nature leads him to the same result as soon as he goes beyond matter and life to mind. And he discovers all the levels. In the quest of God, he begins by seeing him through nature and himself crudely and obscurely at first, till he finds more luminously the one truth behind all religions. So looking through nature, you discover, there is the divinity in the beauty of nature, in the multiplicity of nature, and then in the different ideas of the different religions, because each represents an aspect of the divine. And finally, Sri Aurobindo writes, when he arrives at the unity of his knowledge of God, man and nature, he has the complete knowledge, the sense, and the goal of humanity's progress and labor, and the sure foundation of all perfections and all harmonies. So this is the summary he gives of an entire chapter in the Life Divine. Worth reading the chapter if you want to fully explore the relationship of these 3. But we will take another passage where Sri Aurobindo has written a little booklet called Thoughts and Glimpses, and it's a part of a larger discussion, but a series of aphoristic statements in which he describes the relationship of God, man and nature. So I will read these. We won't elaborate too much, but only where some insights need to be highlighted. First he cites, the title of this section is Man the Purusha. God cannot cease from leaning down towards nature, nor man from aspiring towards the Godhead. It is the eternal relation of the finite to the infinite. When they seem to turn from each other, it is to recoil for a more intimate meeting. So this is the first aphorism. Very interesting. The relationship between the finite and the infinite, what is it truly? The infinite always needs to lean towards the finite because that is how it can express itself. If something is one infinite without a finite appearance, you could not see it. We can see the flower because the whole infinity of the universe puts forward a finite front which we call flower. But if you really observed carefully, flower cannot exist without stem, stem cannot exist without plant, which cannot exist without mountain, which cannot exist without all the way to the universe. Right now the entire universe is leaning forward to nourish and support the existence of a single flower. The infinite has to lean towards the finite in order to be able to express itself. On the other hand, the finite also needs to lean towards the infinite. So what does the finite feel? I end here. But the moment I end here, there is something which continues. Otherwise, how do I know that I ended here? The moment I say my body stops here, there is something beyond which is not me, but which is continuing. And how far does it go? Put a limit. The moment you stop, there has to be something more. Otherwise you couldn't stop. Now conceive of the universe. How big is the universe? Put a limit on it. Let's say the universe ends at this point. What's after? Something continues, which is after all universe. So the very nature of finiteness is that even as it exists because it is finite, it discovers it could not exist if there was not the infinite in which the finite exists. And so it discovers its ultimate reality is the infinite. Otherwise finiteness was not possible. I am the small piece because there is this infinite which supports the small piece. And so the relationship between, it is the eternal relation of the finite to the infinite. And what is that? God cannot cease from leaning down towards nature, nor man from aspiring towards the Godhead. You cannot avoid that aspiration because you're finite and the infinite is your source, is your reality. But the other way is also interesting. Nature is also the movement of God leaning down towards nature for the purpose of fulfilling, for purpose of manifesting. But now he's speaking of the relationship between God and man. When they seem to turn from each other, it is to recoil for a more intimate meeting. Very interesting idea again. Why do we recoil? We have a sense of something beautiful, something more true, something more perfect, more absolute, more complete, whatever form it is. My knowledge should become more complete. My strength is insufficient, it should grow more. Whatever the starting point, it's a leaning towards Godhead. And as you grow towards that, maybe you formulate a relationship. Maybe that relationship takes the form of a religion, of a collective shared relationship. God is all merciful, let's say. And as you go along, you say, but that's not true. Why does he allow all this suffering in the world? And you recoil. This is not a merciful God, this is a monstrous God. And you recoil. But in the recoiling, you also realize your conception of the divine was incomplete. And now you reapproach for a more intimate meeting. Where earlier your concept of the divine was this limited box, Now you discover something more profound. He is not only mercy, He is also strength, He is also knowledge, He is also all reality, He is the world. Whatever the form, your perception of the divine grows more deep, more complete in each new approach. And wherever you have experienced a limited approach, something is missing, there is a recoil, in order that you can approach more deeply. So when they seem to turn from each other, it is to recoil for a more intimate meeting. But if you see his wording, when they seem to turn from each other, not only the human, even the divine seems to recoil. Why? Because your approach is too limited. You will see in the bhakti tradition there is the image of Sri Krishna. When the gopis start looking for him, he hides. And then he plays the flute to draw you closer, to draw you deeper into the forest. Because if you stop short and catch the form, then you have not caught the true person. So every time that you seem to catch the form, he vanishes, he hides. And you realize, no, the form is not him. If you had got him with the form, you would have stopped short and said, this is all there is. I do not need anything more. And so by him escaping, he allows now a more intimate, more deep union. So that's the first aphorism. Next. In man, nature of the world becomes again self-conscious, so that it may take the great leap towards its enjoyer. Nature of the world. The whole world and its nature. Remember, we saw the whole thing is quite stuck in one gigantic movement. There is not possibility of individuality, of special relation. The whole thing is one big mass. So it needs to focus on a center. In man, nature of the world becomes again self-conscious. And the moment there is the self-awareness, I am conscious, the whole of nature has worked hard to build this center of I am conscious, so that it may take the great leap towards its enjoyer. Who is taking the leap? Nature. Through the individual to embrace the enjoyer. Who is the enjoyer? Capital E. See, in English, the vocabulary for the divine is very limited. You have God, you have divine, pretty much nothing else you could think of. But if you go into Sanskrit, there are several dozen terms. And you keep meeting them in yogic literature or in casual vocabulary. You have, of course, Ishvara, you have Purusha, you have Brahman. They all represent different aspects. You have also Bhagavan, you have Narayana, and you have various others. Bhagavan, if you go into the etymology of the root, is that aspect which is the divine enjoyer. And it is an aspect of the Ishvara, the Lord, which you will see in the Isha Upanishad. In the very first verse, the text goes, all this is for the habitation of the Lord. And Sri Aurobindo explains, the purpose to inhabit is to enjoy, to possess and to enjoy. And the divine inhabits the universe in order to possess and enjoy. And so he is the enjoyer of nature. He enters nature, he becomes nature. His power is nature, but he enters his power and the play of his power in order to possess and enjoy. So what is nature's effort? To take the great leap towards its enjoyer. For her to awaken to her own divinity and embrace her Lord. She can't do that because she is stuck in this mechanical rut. The only way she can do that is to form a unit of individuality which becomes now self-conscious, and through that she awakens to make that leap. So in man, nature of the world becomes again self-conscious so that it may take the great leap towards its enjoyer. This is the enjoyer whom unknowingly it possesses, whom life and sensation possessing deny, and in denying seek. Nature possesses the enjoyer unknowingly. She does not know that the enjoyer is already within her, supporting her. She is looking for him outside through forms. She creates forms as if to try to replicate what she glimpses of his possibilities. So unknowingly it possesses, whom life and sensation possessing deny. So every time you breathe the perfume of the flower, you say, wow, what a wonderful smell. I look at the flower, oh, so beautiful. I touch it and I say, oh my God, it's so soft, so delicate, so wonderful. And I don't realize that in possessing, it is the divine presence that I have got through the form. In possessing, we deny. We'd say, no, this is not God, this is nature. And in denying, we seek. Because you do not find that divinity, you do not know what is true love. I have tried so much, I cannot meet true love. What is true beauty? What is perfection? I cannot find it. I have tried so hard to give it form or to discover it in forms, it fails. And so, in denying these forms, we seek that. So in very pithy, aphoristic statements, Sri Aurobindo has captured such a complex relationship. This is the enjoyer whom unknowingly it possesses, whom life and sensation possessing deny, and denying seek. Nature of the world knows not God only because it knows not itself. If truly nature could awaken to itself, it would discover the divine hidden there. It shall know when it knows itself, it shall know unalloyed delight of being. When nature awakens and world awakens to know itself, unalloyed delight of being. And this is really the awakening of nature into her own divinity. Next, possession in oneness and not loss in oneness is the secret. You see, our idea, and this is how the mind thinks, when you join with the divine, you will be lost in the oneness and you will cease to exist. And so the question comes, if you look at the ascetic goal, I want to lose myself in the divine and escape the suffering. Why did you ever get out of it to enter the suffering? And if the whole goal was to get back into loss in the divine, what was the point of all this complexity of the universe? Keep it simple, trap you, get out of the trap, get done with it. But then the question still remains, why this rich, complex universe? And he explains it is because the goal is not loss in oneness, it is possession in oneness. You want to experience the divine and possess the divine in the oneness. But there has to be the possession, not the loss. God and man, world and beyond world, become one when they know each other. Their division is the cause of ignorance, as ignorance is the cause of suffering. As long as you separate man and God, the separation is the ignorance and suffering is its consequence. Similarly, world needs to know God as beyond world. And if nature or world does not know that, nature finds herself bound, limited, helpless, stuck in this mechanical rut. Man seeks at first blindly and does not even know that he is seeking his divine self. For he starts from the obscurity of material nature, and even when he begins to see, he is long blinded by the light that is increasing in him. Very interesting, and if you dwell on this, you'll find many insights. So in the first step, we don't know what we are seeking. I just want to have a comfortable life. I just want to be happy. I want others to be happy. I want to grow in knowledge. I want to grow in strength and capacity. I want to develop my skills. What are you really seeking without realizing is aspects of the divine. And so initially it is a blind seeking. He doesn't know he's seeking for his own divine self which is within him. Where is that joy? Where already the peace? Where already the love and the perfection and everything that you seek? But hidden within, you're looking for yourself actually through all these things. But later, as the light grows through this struggle, And in this case, the light is the mind's awareness growing, and the mind's light now reveals the limitations of the lower instinctive drives and allows you to rise and free yourself from them. But he's blinded by the light that is increasing. My intellect gives me the sense that I can do anything, I can know anything, I can conquer nature, I will create the perfect world by organizing it. And so this light blinds. God too answers obscurely to his search. So if your search is obscure, the divine also answers in that. He seeks and enjoys man's blindness, like the hands of a little child that grope after its mother. You see the relationship of God and man, this little child holding its mother's hand. And it's not conscious, it cannot see, its mother is too big. She's somewhere, and in his blindness he's trying to feel, where's my mom's hand? Ah, okay, now I feel secure. And what does the mother do? She also responds according to his approach. So when the child gives his hand, she holds. When the child pulls his hand, she allows him to pull it away, but staying close by always. The moment he turns to feel, she is right there to respond. And that's the relationship he describes between God and this blind seeking of man. God and nature, so now you saw this relationship of man and God. Now God and nature. God and nature are like a boy and girl at play and in love. They hide and run from each other when glimpsed, so that they may be sought after and chased and captured. So you see children playing, and especially this romantic play among children, run from each other when they see, I hide. Why? The purpose of the hide and seek. If you look at the game of hide and seek, we've all played in childhood. It's one of the most fascinating games for little children. But if you try to enter it as an adult, it's somehow not so interesting. If you look at the child's consciousness, that whole exercise of hiding and discovering, revealing and again hiding, is the nature of the play of the soul in nature. Or in this case, he's describing God and nature. What's the play? First you hide. And the purpose of hiding, someone closes their eyes, now they have to look for you. Now you notice the nature of the delight. Looking for someone who's hidden is a joy. And for the person hiding, to hide and not be found is a joy. To hide so well that the person has to look really hard is a joy. But notice if you have really hidden yourself so well that the fellow cannot find you, the game is pointless. So you come out a little bit. You offer a tantalizing glimpse. He might be hiding there. The fellow is chasing you now. You hide again. So that you may come closer. And the last point of delight, got you. The burst of joy in being found or in finding. And then you again hide. And this time a different place, in a different way, more difficult perhaps. Now I know the way you hide, I know the way you think. You need to do it in a more complex way. So they are at play and in love. So the love binds them. They have to come back together, whatever happens. But they have to separate for the purpose of the play. So they hide and run from each other when glimpsed, so that they may be sought after and chased and captured. In the capturing is the union. In the chasing is the anticipation of the union. And before that, there is the sought after. Where is the other? And that has its own delight. So there are three gradations of the delight. The first, where is the divine? And for nature, it's like, where is the divine? Can I capture the divine? And then there is the chasing. I think I'm going to get it soon. And then there is the finding and catching. And the flower is one of the forms in which nature has sought and captured an aspect of the beauty of the divine. But in the whole bursting out of an entire landscape, When you look from the top of a mountain, you say, oh, it's so beautiful. The entire valley is an aspect of the divine which has been captured by nature. But the moment something is captured, the divine hides a little more. And now nature has to go one more step to capture, and another step. And each step that nature grows to capture the divine is a step of her evolution. So you will see nature is never at rest. At each step she is trying to make it a little more and a little more. But it's a very slow, long process. Man, third element is being brought in. Man is God hiding himself from nature so that he may possess her by struggle, insistence, violence, and surprise. Now, God, you remember the game of hide and seek of nature and God? When God is hiding himself from nature, inside nature, that is man. So you see a human being entirely formed of nature. Your thoughts are the universal mind material which has been gathered to form your subtle body. Your life energy is gathered from the universe. Your body is material tissue gathered from the universe. And all this bundle which is in a continuous change, feeding, growing, changing, is formed of nature. And inside is God hidden. The divine presence hides. And nature is trying to capture God into that form. God is trying to play and seize upon nature from inside. And for what purpose? Possess her by struggle. So nature has bound you. And you have to struggle now to reverse the relationship and recapture nature. Insistence. Nature pushes back, you insist. Violence. When nature is too persistent, you forcefully break and force a change to seize on nature. And surprise. Catch nature by surprise by doing something unexpected. You saw lightning, you caught the power of lightning and make it run your car. Electricity or light. And here by switching on a light, you have suddenly broken nature's monopoly on light and dark. And you have seized on her power. Surprise. So man is God hiding himself from nature. God is universal and transcendent man hiding himself from his own individuality in the human being. So what is God in this? Man who has become universal and transcendent, hiding himself from his individuality in the human being. Very strange way of looking at it. Individuality was one form of the divine, but the liberation from individuality is another form of the divine, hiding from the individual. And being in the individual, I cannot see God. Where is God? He is so universal that he is as big as the universe. I can't see him. He is transcending beyond space and time. How can I even know something which is beyond space and beyond time? I cannot. So God is hiding from the individual, from his own individuality. He is himself at the same time the individual, looking out and then saying, I can't see God. He can't see himself because he's hiding in universality or in transcendence. So God is universal and transcendent man, hiding himself from his own individuality in the human being. The animal is man disguised in a hairy skin and upon four legs. The consciousness of the individuality, which is what he is referring to as man, capital M, in the animal was what? Just this hidden consciousness emerging. The worm is man writhing and crawling towards the evolution of his manhood. Even crude forms of matter are man in his inchoate body. All things are man, the Purusha. So this is this individual hidden through all these stages coming into his own. What we call man is, or the Purusha, has always been through all those levels, only now it has come into its own can articulate itself and can now become conscious of God and of nature and discover the true relationship. For what do we mean by man? This is the last sentence of this section. An uncreated and indestructible soul that has housed itself in a mind and body made of its own elements. So we are the soul, uncreated and indestructible. In that sense, essentially a part of the divine, that has housed itself in a mind and body made of what elements? Of its own elements, that is nature. Now, having gone through this passage, we review the point Sri Aurobindo makes. By knowing the eternal unity of these three powers of the eternal manifestation, God, nature and the individual self, and their intimate necessity to each other, we come to understand existence itself. So what is their unity? The one divine and his power of consciousness and knowing himself in infinite possibilities, and the power to deploy all that knowing into an experience of infinite and eternal manifestation, becoming many. That's man and nature. They are not separate. Into all this movement of pouring, he is always present and organizes centers of himself, and that is the individual. They are never separate. They are never different. They are just one consciousness in three different poises. So God, nature and individual, their oneness. And now their intimate necessity to each other. Elsewhere in one of the articles, Sri Aurobindo writes, nature is the will of God. Without the will of God to manifest, the divine remains unfulfilled, unexpressed. So God needs nature. Nature needs God because that is the absolute which is her fulfillment. Otherwise nature finds she is incomplete, and all that she aspires for, all the beauty and all the joy and all the love is there in that source, which she has to now capture and find here. And the only way by which she can reach that is by focusing to concentrate to build an individual. And many individuals, and each of those will capture an aspect of the divine. So nature needs the individual to recover her oneness with the divine. The individual needs nature in order to experience the divine and express the divine in life. And God needs the experience of the individual to be able to play out a multiplicity in the drama, in the play of delight. Each has an intimate necessity for each other. These three are as if the points of the triangle that make possible what he has described as eternal manifestation. This is one of the questions which often comes up when the mind first looks at this relationship. When did it start? When was the Big Bang? You see, science very conveniently postpones the problem by saying it started with the Big Bang. What was before the Big Bang? We can't discuss, that's not science, that's philosophy. So it has thrown out the question outside its own domain. But in fact, the reality is, when you look at the equations of science, as you approach the point of the Big Bang, everything becomes crunched into itself. Space and time bend and get into something which is called an singularity, where all the equations become 0 divided by 0. Undefined. It's as if all potential is held in the point of the Big Bang. There is never a point where the Big Bang begins, because there is never a point in time in which the Big Bang exists. And so you realize manifestation is eternal. God exists, nature also exists. Nature exists, individuality exists. It is an eternal manifestation. Within the eternal manifestations, there may be cycles of collapse and explosion, if so the divine chooses. Or the divine may say, all right, I've played with the collapse and explosion many times, now let's have a sustained experience. Equally possible. But there is no time ever when manifestation was not or will not be. It's only less revealed or more revealed deeper it always is. Remember nature as the front of God, and God as the obverse of nature, reverse of nature. So their intimate necessity to each other, and we come to understand existence itself, and all that in the appearances of the world now puzzles our ignorance. So having read all these things, we will find all deep questions of existence are resolved in this perspective. And so we move on now. What are the implications of this awakening to self-knowledge, of the individual finding his true personality in the divine? Our self-knowledge abolishes none of these things. It abolishes only our ignorance and those circumstances proper to the ignorance which made us bound and subject to the egoistic determinations of our nature. So when we grow into that consciousness, nothing goes away. The world does not go away. Individual does not go away. You see, the idea that when my consciousness will join with the divine, I will cease to exist. It's as if suddenly you will be withdrawn and will vanish from the world. No, it doesn't happen. There is always the individuality that remains. So those who aim for that, they will say, all right, but when the body dies, then I will be fully absorbed. Then I will be fully merged. Even then, what is merged? The consciousness which got merged may still have the imprint of its separateness, of its individuality. At least in the documentation of space and time, that imprint still exists. That's not gone. You can never withdraw yourself entirely. And Mother makes this as a point. She says, even when the consciousness seems to merge entirely, the fact that it was put out from the divine for a purpose even once, that remains, and as a result, a shadow sense of individuality remains. It is never totally lost, because the divine chose it. And so, it abolishes none of these things when we have self-knowledge. Only it abolishes our ignorance and the circumstances proper to the ignorance which made us bound to the egoistic determination of our nature. So with the ignorance, always replace the word ignorance by separation. Ignorance is the result of separation. Whenever you have separation, you have the sense of limitation. And all the things which come with limitation, I cannot do this, I am unable to know that, I am unable to express that. All those circumstances proper to that egoistic center of ignorance, all those things are abolished. But individual remains, world remains, God remains. When we get back to our true being, the ego falls away from us. Its place is taken by our supreme and integral self, the true individuality. Now the wording is very suggestive. Ego falls away as we get back to the true being. You see the sense? You are getting back and something else is falling away. It's very interesting because the wording describes what happens in consciousness. As you awaken to the divine consciousness, your perspective enlarges. Your consciousness feels itself more deep because all the layers in which you lived earlier are as if on the surface, and you discover finer and deeper and sometimes even more concrete layers of consciousness which earlier you were ignorant to. So the whole sense is of going deeper within, but also of widening in consciousness. So as you approach your true individuality, your perspective grows broad and deep, and the sense of the deeper consciousness is those layers which are not so agitated, which are more permanent, more lasting, more real, because more self-existent. They do not depend on external means, the external things depend on them. So the sense is you deepen yourself into permanence and into vastness and into more completeness. And so your perspective broadens, widens, and at the same time the ego sense, which is on the surface, seems as if to recede from you, begins to thin out and just dissolves. So, when we get back to our true being, the ego falls away from us. Its place is taken by our supreme and integral self, the true individuality. As this supreme self, it makes itself one with all beings and sees all world and nature as its own infinity. So as the consciousness settles into that true person, what do you recognize? Every being that you saw was yourself, is yourself, is only the same one divine in this aspect or that or the other. And at the same time, there is this other movement which is with nature. So this first change takes place with other individuals. They are all myself, or I am in them, they are in me. And what happens to the rest of nature, that whole expanse in space and time? Sees all world and nature in its own. It exists where? Not outside me, but within myself, within my own completeness, and in my own infinity. Now this experience, you will notice, we can look at it this way. In your ego consciousness, you feel yourself, I am inside the body, and therefore everything is outside me. And obviously, therefore, this flower or that person is not me because they are outside me. As your consciousness shifts within, it widens until you begin to feel everything as part of you. To the same way as you feel your arm as a part of yourself. Now, in your physical body, in your physical consciousness, someone hurts you, say, "Ow, you hurt me." They hit your hand, "You hurt me." You could separate from it and say, "You hurt my hand." What's the difference in experience? Your consciousness pulls out of the hand, looks at it as an instrument available to you. So even it is possible that a surgery is done, and if you separate yourself enough, you say, the hand is paining, but I am watching. Or I can embed myself in my consciousness, identify with the hand, and say, I am experiencing pain in the hand. But what is this I? And the I that fills here is the same I that stands back and observes, isn't it? What is this extension which is going there? It's your own consciousness now which identifies and feels one with these things. It's the experience you have with people who are close to you. It's my child. How dare you hurt my child? I feel as if I am threatened. And again, it's a device that nature uses from a parent to feel that identity to such a degree that almost the parent will be willing to lose their own lives in order to protect their child. And if there was not that kind of identity, you could not have sustained the fragile phase of the child's growth. And sometimes that is so encompassing that the child needs to cut away from the parent and say, "Stop interfering, I'm a grown-up now." And you need to separate yourself, but the instinct of the parent still binds, "Oh, but you will always be my child." And it takes a long time. We see parents when they're 70 or 80, the child is now 50, they say, "Oh, but my child is, I need to protect him from." And you have to tell them, "Do you remember what you were like when you were 50? Yes, I understand, but the instinct is too strong to embrace." But what is it that's going out? Your consciousness, your energy, a part of yourself as if extending. Now what happens when we shift the consciousness or recover our own deeper layers? You notice the boundary, the sense of boundary falls away. Being in the boundary is defined because of the rigid form of the body. But if you just step away into your emotions, where is the boundary of your emotions? Where do they stop? You can't really put a place to it. You're feeling multiple emotions, you'll say the center of it is here, but the emotions and the energy of your emotions is everywhere. It can even flow out from you, which is what naturally happens. When you feel affection to somebody, it's as if your heart pours affection to the other. A stream of energy of emotions flows out. And if you shift yourself into the level of the mind consciousness, where is your mind? I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. I was daydreaming. I was far away. Your mind actually can go far away or feel itself far away without needing to move. Now I'm back. Don't worry, I'm listening. But when I'm listening, a part of my mind can still drift and be far away while I'm listening. And you see an extraordinary plasticity or flexibility, or even if you observe carefully, the mind does not have a sense of boundary. Rather, it has been programmed to think that your boundary is your body. If you suddenly knock out the body, the consciousness, which is mind, will suddenly feel decompression, a release. Now I'm everywhere. I'm no more stuck in this narrow body sense, which is often what happens at the time of death. When released from the body, you feel so free. And then when you re-enter the body, you feel a compression and a narrowing and then a dullness in connecting to the body. Typically what we experience in any out-of-body experience, or even sometimes in dream state. When out of the body you feel so free and clear. But naturally, as the consciousness steps back more and more, the sense of boundary fades away, but you feel all that extension as vividly as you would feel in body, your own arms and legs. It is all me, it is in me. And when you reach the true person, the true being, it is the origin from which the whole universe flows out, and therefore the whole universe is felt in you, as intimately as you feel your hand as yours, or as you feel yourself in your hand. And when you meet somebody, even a stranger, you feel yourself in them as intimately as you feel yourself in your body. And they all are in you, the whole universe is in you. And so, this is what he is describing here. As this Supreme Self, it makes itself one with all beings and sees all world and nature in its own infinity. Your consciousness now being infinite, everything is in it. You will remember, we have touched this earlier on other occasions, but you'll remember the message that the mother gave on one of the New Year's messages. She wrote, when you can become conscious of the whole world at the same time, then you can become conscious of the divine. And the suggestion is this: your consciousness has to outgrow this narrow sense of I-ness until it can at the very least feel the whole world as yours. Or you are aware in a wideness which is including the world, then you can become conscious of the divine. Because if you really want to embrace the divine, which is infinite, your consciousness should be able to widen to embrace infinity, isn't it? It's pretty obvious. Otherwise, you approach the ocean, what can you do? You can pick up a cup of water, and that's all you can hold, but you're not holding ocean. In order to embrace ocean, you have to become as wide as ocean. You have to enter ocean and let go of your limitation to embrace it all. And this is what happens naturally. In its own infinity, all world and all nature are seen, even eventually felt. What we mean by this is simply that our sense of separate existence disappears into a consciousness of illimitable, undivided, infinite being, in which we no longer feel bound to the name and form and the particular mental and physical determinations of our present births and becoming, and are no longer separate from anything or anyone in the universe. So now he is describing, elaborating on this experience. And the thing is, the experience is not unfamiliar. As you read it, you will feel something within you is familiar with this idea or this sense or this perception. Because in fact, deep down within us, we are a part of us, or rather the larger part of us is already that, of which this is a narrow, limited front, where we have forgotten what that feels like. And when he describes it like this, there's a sense of familiarity. Oh yes, that feels like something I should have known, or I do remember, but I've forgotten that I remember. And so we read this carefully now with each word. What we mean by this is simply that our sense of separate existence disappears into a consciousness of illimitable, undivided, infinite being. So the sense of separate, I am separate, that is fading out. And 3 words he offers: illimitable, undivided, and then infinite. Now what's the difference? Illimitable, you can't put a limit on it. So the first experience we have, how big is my awareness? How far can I extend my awareness? It feels like it could just go on and on and on. Illimitable, you cannot put a limit on it. The moment you put a limit, I can conceive of something more and beyond that. Put a limit on that, I can conceive of something which goes beyond that limit. So you do not know infinity yet, because your first entry is through the mind's awareness, and the mind cannot know infinity. It is an instrument of finiteness, but it can feel that there is no limit to its boundary. It could go on and on and on unendingly. So the first character of the experience is the separate existence disappears into a consciousness of illimitable being. As this deepens and you outgrow the narrowness of the mind's habit, second layer that emerges, undivided being. So first you have illimitable being, in which there are so many things. I have my body, I have my arms, I have my fingers, I have my thoughts. But as you settle into it more and more deeply, it is one continuum. It's as if a wave put forward one part and another wave put forward another part, but the continuum of the ocean is the one undivided whole. The waves are only an emphasis of quality or of form. There is a sense of a body focus here, there's a sense of an emotional center here, there are as if extensions of my emotions in so many relationships, but there is a sense of continuity throughout. No distinct cut-off, separate boundaries. The analogy or the sense is very similar to the air that you breathe. If you breathe in air, it is now in your lungs, you say, this is my air, this is me. Okay, so you breathe out a little bit, where did the air go? Now I throw out a part of me into this air. Now if you continue to breathe, after a while your sense of boundary fades away, and then you realize, I am the air outside which is entering the lungs. I am breathing in and coming out. You see, the whole relationship changes. And then the third degree of it comes, where all the air filling every lungs is my own expanse of air. It fills these lungs as much as it fills those lungs. I am still the same air filling all these lungs. And you sense in this analogy what it feels like when you open out like this. The sense of separate existence disappears into a consciousness of illimitable, undivided being now. You can have so many focal points, but it is never really separated. And then out of that comes the third degree of the experience. It becomes infinite being. And at this point, already the consciousness has drifted to the edge of the mind, or a higher than mind grade of awareness, which knows and is familiar with infinity. This is what we often experience in certain states of deep concentration or meditation, but it is an experience that the mind can retain, or at least it feels itself leaning back upon. So I feel I am unlimited, but there is a backdrop of infinity against which I lean, in which I rest. And then after a while I feel I am one with that infinity. There is no more any sense of boundary or separation or division. And this is the nature of your awareness now, in which we no longer feel bound to the name and form. So what happened in this whole process? I still have the form, I still have the name, people call me by this. I have a hand and you call it hand, but I am no more bound to it. You could knock it out, replace it by another, it would still be me, because I live more in that than in this. Take an analogy again. I put on a pair of gloves and clothes and whatever is needed to protect myself from extreme cold. To such a degree that even my goggles cover my eyes, nothing of my body is exposed to the cold. So we are, let's say, in Antarctica. All of us have put on our clothes. We meet each other. I can't make out, who are you? Because your clothing is so thick and covering. Who are you? And the person says, I'm so and so. Oh yes, from your voice I could make out. But now if you shed all this clothing and put on a completely different clothing, different form, different color, it doesn't change you, isn't it? And if your relationship with your body is the same, that you live in this consciousness which is infinite, undivided, the body is not you and it cannot divide you. You are equally in all bodies, so to say, in all things. Now somebody takes off this body and plugs in another body. I have not changed. As much as take off these clothes and put on other clothes, I don't change. So, no longer attached to, no longer feel bound to the name and form and the particular mental and physical determination of our present births and becoming. So there's a particular pattern of thought and body form which describes this personality in this birth. In a different birth, the soul may take a completely different pattern of thought and body form. The body form is different, obviously, because we have different heredity. But the mind also can be completely different bundle of thought and emotion habits or tendencies which the soul chooses to put out for a different kind of experience. Having experienced a life as a thinking scientist with analytical powers primarily, the soul says, now I want to experience a life of pure love of art and beauty and exploration of that space. And it puts forward a different imprint in which the emotions and the sensitivity of the perceptions are stronger. The rational part may be even withdrawn, available to be brought forward if needed, but not important for this experience. And so I have no particular attachment even to this sense of the form of mind or body from this poise of the true person. And are no longer separate from anything or anyone in the universe. There's no more that sense of separateness. Equally, the flower is me, I am in it, it is in me, as Jupiter or a distant star. You will recall one of Sri Aurobindo's sonnets where he describes this experience. I don't know if I can pull it out immediately. But there is the line there where he says, Arcturus and Belphegor are in me. Arcturus and Belphegor, these are two of the biggest stars. This is a different sonnet, but I'll read from it, from a sonnet called The Cosmic Spirit. I am a single self all nature fills. Immeasurable, unmoved, the witness sits. He is the silence brooding on her hills, the circling motion of her cosmic mights. I have broken the limits of embodied mind and am no more the figure of a soul. The burning galaxies are in me outlined. The universe is my stupendous whole. My life is the life of village and continent. I am earth's agony and her throbs of bliss. I share all creatures' sorrow and content, and feel the passage of every stab and kiss. Impassive I bear each act and thought and mood. Time traverses my hushed infinitude. So in this consciousness, which is cosmic spirit, even time is passing through in this infinitude of consciousness. But one gets a glimpse of this, the nature of this consciousness and its relation with everything in the universe. And what happens to you at that point? Do you have any sense of birth or death? Body was taken on and dropped. You didn't take birth, you didn't die, isn't it? And so this Sri Aurobindo describes, this was what the ancient thinkers called the non-birth, or the destruction of birth. Interesting. Non-birth, because I have no sense of ever being born or dying. So non-birth. But earlier I used to have that sense. So it's as if the experience of birth and death has been destroyed. So destruction of birth. And so another word which is also used to describe this, or nirvana. Nirvana has many, let's say, connotations. Even within the Buddhist tradition, it is used on many different levels. But essentially the Sanskrit root of the word is blowing out of the flame, extinction of the sense of separateness. And so the sense of ego, which was your determining unit, the narrow little flame, poof, it dissolved, and you lapsed into your true self, which is complete. At the same time, we continue to live and act through our individual births and becoming. So while all this has happened, as far as I am concerned, the body has not gone away anywhere, the mind imprint is still there, all this personality and all these activities are going on. I don't have a particular fixation on it, because I feel each one as much me as this one. So, at the same time, we continue to live and act through our individual birth and becoming, but with a different knowledge and quite another kind of experience. Your experience now through this form is very different, because each time you meet somebody, even a total stranger, you have the sense of intimate familiarity. And if, depending on the poise of consciousness in which you are centered, if you live on a sufficiently deeper poise, then each time you meet them, you may even remember all the past connections, or at least sense them vaguely. Ah yes, this one is a familiar one. When did we meet? Looks like maybe 2 or 3 lives ago. I don't know details, but you're familiar enough. And perhaps with that emerges also a sense of what did we do? I think we spent a lifetime together in exploring this particular kind of experience. But it's kind of vague now, but still you're familiar, you're not new. And you meet a worm, and you look at the worm with the same love with which you would greet someone which is your own child. Oh, it is so sweet, it is so kind, it is doing its own thing, it is struggling. And with the same compassion, you will help it to do whatever it needs to do. And if a mosquito sits on your arm, you might say, with the same compassion, oh yes, you have a struggling life, but whack. So the whole poise of consciousness is so different. We continue to live and act through our individual birth and becoming, but with a different knowledge and quite another kind of experience. And if for some reason one has to intervene even to harm a creature because there is no option left, well, you may still do it in a way that assists its evolution, because that's your larger perspective. Everything is there for the larger movement of awakening of consciousness and evolution. The world also continues, but we see it in our own being and not as something external to it and other than ourselves. So all this while, everything is there in us. You can be at the top of a mountain in isolation, the world is still within you, or you can be in the thick of the battle of life and struggle of life, and you will still hold the world within you. In your surface consciousness, you may concentrate in a particular activity. Now, as I am stitching this or painting this, my mind is concentrated on this. But my consciousness lives still in the sense of that oneness. When my mind disengages and comes back, all of that was always there intact. Just as, if we take an analogy, when you are concentrated in something so deeply that at that moment in concentration, it feels as if you've forgotten even the whole world. The world is still there. And when you come back, you notice, yes, it was always there. Or in your own emotions, you have a sense of work to be done. After this, I have an important meeting for which I have to prepare myself. And then I engage in this work where I as if forget myself in my mind's concentration. I come back and that awareness is still intact. I have not forgotten who I was. All of this is still intact. So those kinds of experience would still be there. You would focus on something, engage with it, perhaps with an exclusive surface concentration. But those other layers are still present. And to the extent that you may live more in them, you will still have the sense of exclusive concentration, but never even losing the reality of the underlying oneness. So, the world also continues, but we see it in our own being and not as something external to it and other than ourselves. To be able to live permanently in this new consciousness of our real, our integral being, is to attain liberation and enjoy immortality. So first here your experience is liberation, meaning you are no more bound to anything, no limitation of any kind. Your consciousness is free and yet you have an individuality. But it is now the true individuality and it is the integral being. You are now this multifaceted whole, not just a tiny narrow front which is projected to support this personality. But at the same time, you have also the experience of immortality, because consider all the surface layers you've put on down to the clothes. The clothes are torn and replaced. The body is knocked out and replaced. The mind formation is knocked out and replaced. I am still the same. I am therefore immortal. And yet an individual. So the experience of immortality is enjoyed even as there is a focal point. Now what's the difference between this and the old plain nature where individuality did not form? Well, nature is stuck in her whole. She is conscious of a large universe, that she is infinite. But there is no part in her where she experiences immortality. She is always stuck in the constant change. She creates a flower, the flower has to die. She creates a mountain, it has to die. She creates a galaxy, it has to die. Everything is born and dying because that's the movement of nature. There is no experience of immortality. Except if you step back beyond nature, as if the whole of nature is immortal, but not in the experience of nature. But now through the individual which has been developed by nature, awakening to its own divinity, you have the experience of immortality. And who is experiencing it? Nature in you is experiencing the immortality. Nature in you has reached up and found her true relationship with God through a center. And God has found His manifestation in nature, a center in which the divinity can glow out as divine. No more concealed, no more hidden by nature, revealed. And then increasingly revealed perhaps. The evolution does not stop because infinite possibility, infinite potential can now glow out and express through this center. Nature is fulfilled, God is fulfilled, individual is fulfilled. To be able to live permanently in this new consciousness of our real, our integral being is to attain liberation and enjoy immortality. And the phrase enjoy immortality brings the particular aspect that in this consciousness you do not experience anymore the struggle and suffering or pain of duality, because you live in the consciousness of the oneness. And it, just as an analogy, if you punch the wall, of course you will feel pain. The wall will also feel pain. But when you slam your hands against each other, who feels pain? I feel pain in both equally. There is not the same sense that the ego shattering itself against the wall. There is rather the play and the delight of meeting myself. And it is only in a consciousness that can hold oneness that you can experience the delight of the Satchidananda, because there is no more bifurcation or division. All is yourself meeting yourself. Even if in the collision there is the extreme sting of the clash, it is not experienced as pain, because it is yourself that you meet, and it is in delight of consciousness that you meet. So this is the character of this immortality. It is enjoyed in the character of the Satchidananda. So Sri Aurobindo has now brought us to the importance of the individual in relation to nature, to God, and as a result, for the purpose of the yoga, you see how nature is included in this awakening. Not only your own nature, but even the universal nature. Because it not only is it a part of yourself, but in this new consciousness, you also have a different relationship in fulfilling nature and in awakening her possibilities. So this part of the awakening of nature will come later. But in the next paragraph, he takes up the question of immortality. He has just said we attain liberation and enjoy immortality. But there are so many paths, so many traditions which say you cannot enjoy immortality unless you get out of mortality. And so he deals with that question in some detail. The role of physical death, the nature of changing forms, and its relationship with the liberated consciousness, and so on. It's a theme we will take up next time. And for now we can pause here and consider any comments or questions.
Is there any practical way of doing yoga in sleep and in dreams? Because we are just having only just a philosophical concepts. But is there any particular way or any method can be followed to develop ourselves?
If you want to develop yourself in sleep state or dream state, you must first become conscious in sleep state and dream state. As long as your sleep and dream is mechanical nature, you cannot do anything. Nature will lead you. There's another passage which I wanted to share, where Sri Aurobindo explains how if you give yourself to nature as it is, you'll only be stuck in its rounds. You have to break out into the individual awareness which exercises itself on nature in order to be able to speed up your evolution. Your dream state, your sleep state currently is the rhythm that nature has set. If you do nothing, that's your slow progression. If you can train yourself to become conscious in sleep state or dream state, you can consciously do things, including grow in consciousness. So right now you're unconscious in sleep, and what you can do is hold an intention before you fall asleep. You hold a state of aspiration to feel the divine presence, to know the divine, feel love for divine, feel consecration or devotion, whatever form that you feel in relation to the divine. Even you can hold an awareness like this, the sense of vastness of your mind's awareness turning to the divine, aspiring to embrace and hold the divine peace, light, love. Whatever state of relationship that you set before sleeping, you drift off into sleep with the intention that this should continue and deepen during sleep. Now what will happen is your surface mind, which is doing this concentration, will go into sleep, but something of the inner layers will catch this movement and continue it. The evidence will be, when you wake up from sleep, you will wake up with the same feeling or the same mood. Even if diminished, it is not gone. Then you know that during the sleep, this movement of aspiration or the change of consciousness that came with it continued. So the key is how you enter, which will determine what happens during the night. For what?
for
For
the
sleep.
state of mind or the
Whatever helps you. You can do it by meditating on it, you can do it by reading something, somebody else might do it as an artistic expression. Every time I paint something beautiful, my consciousness changes, or I enter in a certain relationship with the divine. It does not matter what you do. The point is to enter that relationship. So when you say practical, practical offers you 100 ways. Which way works for you is your practical starting point. For somebody else, it may be different. Yes, reading can help. Meditation, dwelling in your mind, contemplation, reading a poem that uplifts, doing the japa of the divine name, but with feeling, not as a mechanical exercise. All of these are means to enter into the relationship. But increasingly you will find the external means are less and less important. As the relationship develops, you can simply put yourself in the relationship. Do you feel love for your child? How do you practically feel love for your child? Do you need to repeat your child's name? Do you need to look at his picture? Do you need to draw a picture? Do you need to read his life story? You just remember your child and you feel the love, isn't it? So in the same way you will feel the love for the divine. If you don't feel it now, you use these means to help you awaken to the experience. But if you become very quiet, you will feel that the love is already there within you. Otherwise you would not be here. And perhaps the love emerges through your heart's feelings or through your mind's seeking to know and to feel close. But it's already there. But that has to be felt by becoming very quiet on the surface part, which is saying what to do, what to do. When you become very quiet, you'll find it's already there. And when you feel it is already there, you will deepen in it. And it will be more and more complete. This is the most direct way. But if you are not able to do this, then you use those indirect methods of activity.
God is unfulfilled himself. Then he not trying to fulfill himself?
Yes, the whole universe is his movement of self-fulfilling. You see, think of it this way. When the divine dwells upon all infinite possibilities and all the relationships of all those possibilities within himself and the joy of all those relationships, the universe is already present in him, in his consciousness. Okay? So the very fact that he dwells on himself is the universe. In that sense, the universe is his dream, dwelling on his own possibilities. When you are asking this question, it is the divine experiencing what is it like to ask this question. And that's you. And when we read this book, it is the divine experiencing what's it like to discover through something like this, through this experience. And all this is happening right now in the oneness of the divine Satchidananda, to experience all these possibilities. The universe is held in himself. So you can think of the universe as a dream of the one, or because he is himself the dream, he is the material of the dream, you can conceive of himself as pouring out to become his dream. But it's really the same thing, there's no difference. It's just a way of looking at it. For us who are used to seeing things, pieces outside us, this other picture is easier to see. Oh, he pours out and he separates himself into so many forms. That's how the mind conceives of it. But it's always him in himself, relating to himself. There is no separateness really. It's just a way by which your mind finds it more familiar. But if you dwell on this idea, you can also become familiar with the idea that there is only oneness in which you experience forms and appearances. And you can tune yourself to view and experience the world like this. And when you think of it this way, you are walking on the road or you are walking in the forest and you are aware that all this is held in the oneness of the divine, and the divine conceives himself to be all these trees and this road and this person who is walking, and nothing is moving. It is only the divine consciousness as you experiencing itself in different relationships with the divine consciousness as trees and as forests and as stones and as animals. It's all taking place in the dream of the oneness, dreaming of its multiplicity. Or you can think of it, more familiar form, divine has become this, become this, become this, become this, and now we are discovering each other in this walking. You see the difference? So start with whatever is easier for you. Use this as a theme of meditation. In everything, the divine is already fulfilling himself, and the movement of fulfilling in time is the evolution. Everything grows to fulfill more and more completely what began as a tiny seed which grows. So you use this as a theme of meditation where you walk, preferably in a safe space, not with traffic around you, and you dwell on this idea that what is this space where you're walking within the divine dream of himself, where everything is himself including you. And your consciousness enjoying this is the divine enjoying it as you and through you. And you look at each flower, each plant, each animal, each stone as forms of himself. It's a very beautiful experience. But if you spend a few minutes every day doing it, you will find the perception becomes so familiar, it will be your normal way of experiencing the world. So you will recall the sentence which we had read last time. This individual being of ours is that by which ignorance is possible to self-conscious mind, but it is also that by which liberation into the spiritual being is possible and the enjoyment of divine immortality. And it's for this reason that we have entered into this game, and this is our journey, awakening from ignorance through the passage or stages of liberation into the spiritual being, culminating in this enjoyment of divine immortality, which is the true purpose of this universe. Sri Aurobindo makes it a point to highlight this. He says that the enormous suffering that you see in the universe, from the birth through all these billions of years, can only be justified if this is going to lead to an experience of such an extraordinary bliss that all the struggle we had to pass through is worthwhile for that. And you will see the nature of the whole struggle is the awakening or the formation of individuality. We had to emerge out of universality, struggling against, pushing against, forcing the individual to emerge, and then struggling to wake up with the partial light, and then struggling to become aware of the divine presence. And then increasingly as we enter in relation with the divine, the struggle phase fades and we grow into joy to greater joy. So in the initial phase even of the conscious yoga, there is an effort to break free from our animal nature or old habit. But increasingly as we can feel and enter in relation to the divine, that is replaced by growing joy to greater joy. And when many of us so enter this experience and begin to relate to each other, and therefore can share in what we may call a shared divine living, that will be the beginning of the new consciousness, the revealed divinity. And when this grows to a scale where we can actually experience the whole universe and each perception and experience as a touch of the Satchidananda, that's how the experience of the universe is going to become. And unendingly growing in bliss. So, a few billion years of struggle, it's a very small price to pay to build sufficiently strong centers of individuality in which all this extraordinary, blissful, unending growth of bliss and play will be played out. And somewhere within this struggle also, somewhere secretly within us, we know this. And the soul yearns for this. And even enjoys the steps of the awakening as part of the joy of reaching that. It's not in a hurry. It says, yes, this is also interesting. Oh, this is interesting. To live a whole life struggling to overcome difficulties. Wow, what a challenge. From the soul's perspective, because it's immortal, it can do that. The surface personality struggles, it looks back at life and says, I've had a very hard life. But inside the soul says, wow, how much I've grown, how much I was able to overcome. What a learning experience, and so on. So as we reorient our perspective and settle from the deeper vision, all these things change. Even though externally there may be pain, yes, this hurts. Internally something says, but that's an interesting experience. How can I overcome and grow out of this? And in reading these texts, Sri Aurobindo helps us to reorient ourselves, to begin to see and experience things more and more, even while being in a mental awareness, to see and experience things more and more the way the true consciousness sees it. And because you are more oriented to it, the true consciousness can begin to fill your mind and fill your perception and help you now to settle into this. That's why you'll see repeatedly he uses this phrase, the real individual, or he says, our real, our integral being, because that's the reality which is already there behind. And as you reorient yourself to see from its perspective, the real fills. And it happens very quickly. And that's how Sri Aurobindo not only describes these things, these experiences, but he makes them vivid and tangible, and we feel them accessible, and all this is possible in this lifetime. It took Sri Aurobindo not more than a few years, without help. With his help, maybe we are a little slower, but still it should be doable within this lifetime. The fact that right now we can share in this vision that he shows us, why can't we be living in it all the time? If you can enter it, and it doesn't take much time to enter it, can we not stay in it? The tendency is for the mind to go back to its old habit and old way of looking at it. And that's why we need to make repeated efforts to reorient ourselves. But very quickly, as we make these efforts, it becomes the norm. And in our individual surface mind also we begin to look and experience things more and more closely to our true center and our real being. That needs some practice though, some effort. And that's why what I said earlier, to meditate while walking, some time needs to be given to help to reorient ourselves. If nothing else, at the start of every day, read this or something similar. Change your perspective of your sense of purpose, of what you're going to do, of what this life is for. And holding that poise, you enter your day. Even if you lose yourself in the day, when you come back at the end of the day, you will look at this again and it will be there. It will not be gone. It will be there at the backdrop. But it will have changed how you respond to the same challenges of life. We'll continue this next Friday. All of us, it should be all our experience.